Hello, everyone, and welcome to Maxwell Henderson's opening artist in residence talk. I'm Beth Ann Gerstein. I'm the executive director of the American Museum of Ceramic Art in Southern California. AMOCA champions the art, history, creation, and technology of ceramics through exhibitions, collections, outreach, and studio programming. Today's artist talk focuses on the work of Maxwell Henderson, who began a long-term residency here at AMOCA Studio in September 2025. AMOCA's Artist in Residence program, established in 2012, is one of the few long-term fellowship opportunities for ceramic artists on the West Coast. Our residency program provides artists an opportunity to produce or develop a new body of work and is funded through generous support from Julianne and David Armstrong, Laguna Clay, and the Wingate Foundation. The next call for residency applications will be in January 2026. Today, Max will share about his practice, past work, and future directions as artist in residence at AMOCA. Now I'm excited to tell you a little bit more about Max. Maxwell Henderson is a nationally recognized ceramic artist born in Arizona in 1996. He received his BFA from Arizona State University and completed a post-bac program at Pennsylvania State University before earning his MFA in ceramics from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln in 2023. His work has been prominently featured in numerous juried and invitational exhibitions. Henderson's work has earned him multiple awards, including a grant from the Rudy Autio Endowment Fund. He has participated in several esteemed residencies, including the Archie Bray Foundation, where he was a summer resident in 2023 and has a piece included in their permanent collection, and at the Red Lodge Clay Center. Henderson has served as an instructor of record at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, teaching courses in ceramics and three-dimensional design. His commitment to education extends to the general community, including teaching at Belvoir Terrace, the LUX Center for the Arts, and Red Lodge Clay Center. Henderson will be in residence at AMOCA from September 2025 through August of 2026. Before Max starts his presentation, I want to remind everyone this talk is being recorded. There'll be an opportunity for Q&A after the presentation. I will now turn the presentation over to Max.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction, Beth Ann. I really appreciate it. Now, the next goal is to try to not have any technological issues. Does that look okay to everyone too? Okay, great. Awesome. So, hello and good afternoon to everyone who is here. Thank you for making time out of your day to be here. I also wanted to express gratitude to the Wingate Foundation, AMOCA, and the wonderful people who are here and make it what it is, the Armstrong family, Laguna Clay, and their generous donations to our studio, and then to all of those who donate to AMOCA or simply just participate here. My name is Maxwell Henderson. I am one of the long-term resident artists here at AMOCA. I've been here since early September, and I've loved every single minute of it. So I'll be doing a few things this afternoon. First, I'll begin by telling you a little bit about myself and my origins, and then in relative chronological order, I will share my journey in clay and how these experiences shape my values and what I notice in life. And by doing that, I'll be unfolding how my explorations in clay evolved with my experiences. All right, so let me bring you all the way back to the 1900s. I was born in Arizona in 1996, and I am the youngest of four half-brothers. And if you can't tell, I'm the one who cannot keep his eyes open. I grew up in Mesa, Arizona, which is a city that's part of the Phoenix metropolitan area. That's why I tell people I'm from Phoenix, because most people don't really know what Mesa is. And I'll be honest with you all. My childhood was a very difficult experience for me. I was raised in poverty, and I frequently encountered microaggressions, along with derogatory and dismissive comments on my racial ambiguity, being half black and half white. I had many loved ones in my life who struggled with drug addiction, and that includes both my parents. I have watched many childhood friends fall into the same cycle, and some have even lost their lives because of it. And when you're too poor to travel, too poor to have access to high quality food or even just food in general, so poor that you remember sleeping in the car with your mom and your brother, that takes a toll on you. Some of my earliest memories are feelings of fear, anxiety, isolation, resentment, low self-esteem, you name it. And I carried these sentiments with me all through my teenage years, and admittedly, even today, sometimes. So I started doing ceramics 13 years ago. I took a ceramics class my freshman year of high school, simply to just get my art credits out of the way early. I didn't really care about art because I felt like it wasn't for poor people like me. I knew so little about art that I walked into the drawing and painting room and on the first day of class, and I remember asking the drawing teacher, I was like, "Is this ceramics?" And he looks around, he's looking at all the easels and the drawing tables, and he looks back at me and he's like, "No, ceramics is the room with the clay in it." And little did I know that my life was about to change. Clay quickly became a transformative part of my life when I made my first pot at 15 years old. It was this little 2-inch bowl that I made from using Laguna's LB blend clay. And then it was reduction fired to cone 10 using Val Cushing's green, blue, black glaze. And I was initially drawn to ceramics because of its materiality and experimental possibilities. However, deep down, pottery taught me that I could create beauty that I wasn't afforded growing up and value from dirt, which is a material that is often as dismissed as I felt. It gave me a sense of agency and conviction in my self-worth that I hadn't felt before. And it only took me weeks to decide that I would do this for the rest of my life. I was immediately captivated by the possibilities of materials and quickly began making my own test. Rarely did they turn out as good as I hoped, but if ceramics does anything, it challenges our limited intentions. And I was fortunate enough to have a very good friend who was just as invested in clay as I was. My friend Chris Polensky and I set up a studio space in his parents' garage when we were in high school. That way we could continue making work after school or during like holidays or breaks. And the things I made in high school were pretty much just like a hodgepodge of inspirations that I found from Google Images or makers that were in proximity to me, along with like my kinship with utilitarian pottery. And I really enjoyed the process of making multiple parts on the potter's wheel and then assembling those pieces into vessels and teapots. And while I was in high school, I volunteered at this amazing art center called the Mesa Art Center. And I couldn't believe I only lived a few miles away from their state-of-the-art ceramic studio. In exchange for volunteering, I could use the studio and put my work in their kilns. And here at the MAC, that's what it's also known as, I was introduced to many local ceramic artists who took me under their wing and exposed me to the world of ceramics. Not only did I learn what Nikeka was through them, but I also learned that it was actually pronounced NCECA, which is the National Council on Education's for the Ceramic Arts. Now, everything about the MAC was amazing, but the most formative experience for me there was being introduced to atmospheric firing, particularly soda firing. And for those who don't know, soda firing involves a process of spraying a sodium-based solution, which is oftentimes soda ash, into a hot kiln at its peak temperatures. And that solution volatilizes and bonds with the surface of the clay and glaze, forming its own sodium-based glaze, and it also changes the visual qualities of the glaze I applied prior. And my life after soda firing is changed once again. So now it's my senior year of high school. I'm predominantly focusing on these assembled wheel-thrown forms that I then soda fire at the MAC. And this was also the time that I began applying to colleges. And I only applied to state schools because they were the cheapest and I could really afford to go with a full ride scholarship. Luckily, this university, Northern Arizona University, which is arguably the best for atmospheric firing, was only 150 miles away from me, which was just far enough from home, too. But while I was volunteering at the MAC, Bradley Clem, who was a resident artist at the time, and he is now a professor at the University of Denver, suggested that I apply to this private art school called the Kansas City Art Institute in Missouri. Considering many artists that I admire had went there, I did apply. And I got in. And not only did they offer me a $90,000 scholarship to go, they even flew me out to the school to tour it. It was my first time on a plane and my first time out of the Southwest. But weeks before I was supposed to arrive, my financial aid package showed up, and I realized that I would still be over $50,000 in debt. I guess $90,000 sounds like a lot until you realize tuition is $34,000 a year, which is now $44,000. I looked that up. That's crazy. So I couldn't go. I simply could not afford it. But Max, what about Northern Arizona University? Can't you just go back there? And I had the same thought until they told me that the campus housing was full, and I just could not afford the cost of housing that was in town. So I went from thinking I was moving over 150 miles from the home that I felt confined to over 1,200 miles from home to 2 miles. And that's how I ended up at Arizona State University. And I was so bitter about this. Not that I thought ASU was a bad program, it's actually really fantastic. However, I felt stuck in a place that I was so adamant to escape. And I didn't know this then, but it helped me realize that when something in our lives don't immediately go our way, it's okay to feel upset in those moments, but just know that it will inevitably manifest into something beautiful in ways that we can never predict, whether it's either tomorrow or 10 years from now. So thankfully, ASU had a soda kiln. I was financially responsible for myself, so I tried to make the most out of what I could afford. So I focused on smaller utilitarian pots so I could make the most from a bag of clay. And at this point, I truly believe I'm going to make a lifelong career out of atmospheric fired functional pottery. I love soda firing so much so that I even got a tattoo of my first soda fired cone pack. I began thinking at this point, I just may actually like going to school in Phoenix. After all, I did have the luxury of working under these three exceptional, talented artists as my professors. But I also met this weirdly ambitious dude named John Domenico, and he asked me one day, "Hey, do you want to come to Denver this summer to help me finish this massive wood kiln that I'm building?" Now, if you built the kiln, you know the work that was in store for me. But as a 19-year-old eager to leave Arizona, all I heard was, "I want to spend a summer not in Arizona." So I enthusiastically said yes. So I went, and it was the most strenuous, humbling, exhausting experience that I've had to date. We spent all summer stressfully building this kiln. I was scraping skin off my Achilles and breaking toes, well, one toe. And that summer, I realized that you apparently shouldn't wear chacos when you're doing masonry work. But what I love about this summer, though, is that I had the privilege of playing a small role in building the foundation of what is now an incredible nonprofit known as the Lucera Collective. This summer showed me what hard work is and how it pays off. We made over 400 pieces of pottery for a showcase dinner for his family's winery, which is called the Balustrade Vineyards. And to see the work presented and used in this way, I felt the same sense of pride that I experienced when I made my first bowl. But this unforgettable experience was quickly followed by one of the lowest points in my life. I had met someone that I became very close to, but they really struggled with their mental health. I was a 20-year-old at the time who was also struggling with my mental health, and it was hard to see a person that I deeply cared about express suicidal ideation. And it was even harder to witness and stop active attempts. I spent my time in undergrad at hospitals, mental health facilities, and home. I was scared to go to the studio because I didn't know what I would come home to. So for 2 years, I am barely at the studio and I'm barely making any work. And I always said that I didn't know where I'd be without ceramics, and I was now learning what that looked like. I had isolated myself from everyone who cared about me. I had felt all those same feelings again, fear, shame, isolation, and I knew a change had to be made. So in my final semester of undergrad, I made the hardest decision of my life, and I left my relationship. I left with my bike and anything that I could carry on my back. So right now, it's 3 a.m. in February of 2019. I am sitting in the parking lot of a Denny's on the brink of homelessness. I don't know who to call because I've isolated everyone around me. But I called my friend Chris Polinsky, and he is also at ASU at this time prepping for his thesis. And his sister and him come and pick me up, and their dad, Basil, lets me live with them for 3 months so I could finish my thesis and get my bachelor's degree. But this was the first time in 2 years where I actually had the time and energy to focus on myself and my work. And I like to say that the best mistake of my life was not making a plan B, that I have to be an artist, and I can't believe I almost lost sight of that. So I got to work. I made my entire thesis show in just 2 months. And not only is this difficult to do, even with the best circumstances, but it was even harder because our soda kiln was condemned to demolition the summer before. So I couldn't rely on the 3 years of research and practice that I had explored with soda firing. But it's quite amazing and unexpected to see the growth we experience when we're forced to improvise. And I'm happy to say that I had a very successful exhibition in my eyes, and that I was accepted into a month-long work study at Aramont School of Arts and Crafts in Gatlinburg, Tennessee. And this was perfect because I was definitely ready to leave Arizona. Only problem was I've never been able to afford a car, so how the heck am I going to get there? But it's weird how things work out. My friend Hans Miles, he offered me to give me his old car, which was abandoned in his driveway for 2 years. The battery was dead, the tires were rotted, the AC was shot, the motor mounts were destroyed, and the windows didn't work. The interior was also covered in dust. That's probably what happens when 2 years of these giant dust storms pass through it. And at this point, I had a week until I was supposed to be in Tennessee. But I was determined to move forward. So after a very deep clean, I spent most of the dozens of dollars I had to get this car fixed up just enough to be drivable. I packed the few belongings that I had, and my friend Chris Polensky and I got into the car and headed east to Tennessee. And I drove this 2005 Ford Focus station over 3,000 miles when it should only be driven probably three. Well, at least I tried. And that's how I ended up in Tennessee for a month-long work study at Aramont. And growing up the way I did, you don't really get to travel much. Well, not at all, actually. And I'm loving every bit of this experience. I had a reinvigorating soda fire workshop with Potter Matt Long, who's based in Mississippi. But being here really did bring me to tears. I had never experienced a landscape like this, and it made me realize all that I wasn't afforded to for 22 years. And while I loved the community at Aramont, I would frequently sneak off in the Smoky Mountains that were nearby and just hang out there alone. And yes, I'm introverted, but after 3 years or 2 years without a sense of individuality, it was my way of reconciling my lost time. And just like that, my time at Aramont was setting, and my next adventure was at Penn State. But before driving to Pennsylvania, I did stop in this small town in Arkansas called Eureka Springs. My mom became sober in 2017, and she moved to Arkansas to rebuild her life in the same way that I was trying to do at this time. She had been there ever since, and now she owns and runs a drive-through coffee shop in the Ozarks. And it was really healing for me to witness this. So after spending some time with her, I left Arkansas to begin my time at Penn State as a post-bac student. For those who don't know, it's basically a non-degree seeking student at a university who's completed their bachelor's degree but is not quite ready to jump into a master's program. And this was going to be a really good year for me. Things were looking up, and my friends were there. John Domenico is a grad student at this time, and Bradley Clem is currently an adjunct professor teaching there. Now, unless you're familiar with the Clay community, you can never understand how honored and intimidated I was to work with Christopher Staley. He has impacted my work and how I view my humanity since I was 16 years old. And when I say I was fangirling, I was fangirling. And all right, enough of that. But just like in Tennessee, I found myself in Pennsylvania again, crying in a forest. I had never experienced a true autumn like this, like they experience in the Northeast, and this is my favorite time of year. And you got to remember, I'm from Phoenix. We do not get this there. So for years, these landscapes that were once a fantasy were now a reality for me. And in the same month, I got to see the fantastical phenomena of freezing rain and also learn that not every frozen pond can sustain body weight. And while I was at Penn State, I was feeling really anxious because I didn't know what I was going to be doing after this. How could I possibly sustain a ceramic career outside of school when I still feel like I'm playing catch up? And people around me started asking, well, what about grad school? Personally, I didn't feel like I was good enough, but I trusted them and I began making work for applications. Problem was, I sucked at photography. And documentation matters because it's the only way they're going to experience your work when looking at your applications. And I was so embarrassed when I saw this image in Ceramics Monthly, but there was one person that I met at Penn State who basically saved me. And that person was Andrew Castaneda. Andrew was in his final year of grad school at this time, and he showed me the power of high quality documentation. And actually, a couple of months ago, he and I were talking about this very moment. And at the time, I saw him as an expert in his craft, but he was telling me that he was also learning at this time. And to see where he's taken his photography, I'm always amazed to see his growth. So, knowing that I had the support of those at Penn State, I continued making work. And then every now and again, a little voice in my head would tell me that I would not be accepted, that the work that I was making wasn't good enough, that I wasn't good enough. But every time Andrew documented my work, I just thought to myself, you know what? Maybe I'll be good. So at this point, it's winter at Penn State. I'm living off coins in my change jar. And I remember crying in the McDonald's parking lot late at night when I went to go pay for a McChicken, and I realized the highest denomination I had in my jar were dimes. And because of this, I only had enough money to apply to 3 schools. But luckily, in March of 2020, I received a call saying that I was accepted into the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. And they graciously flew me out to Lincoln, Nebraska, where I accepted their invitation to join their program. And I felt so ecstatic. I felt so worthy. I felt everything was falling into place. Everything was going to work out. But do you know what happened also in March of 2020? Yeah, COVID-19. So finding ourselves in a once in a hundred year pandemic was absolutely terrifying for me. We lost our studio access. I lost my job that was tied to the university. And I could only ask myself at this time, is Penn State going to refund my tuition since I didn't finish the semester? They didn't. But like I said, when bad things happen, it'll inevitably manifest into something beautiful in ways that we can never predict. A week after losing studio access, uh, we started an artist collective in Brad Clem's basement. And we were adamant about staying productive artists during this uncertain time. However, that didn't last very long. Instead, we spent our time resting. We spent our time exploring. I got to see my first apple tree and I got to pick my first strawberries, which was really, really cool. We took a lot of nature strolls. We made a bunch of food together and we enjoyed handcrafted margaritas with oceanic views in front of Brad's TV. But then in late May of 2020, George Floyd was murdered by Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin, while the other officers just stood by and watched their coworkers suffocate a human being. And the vitriol and the racism and the ignorance that I both witnessed and experienced during this time was severely heightened. I even had white family members use their proximity to me to defend their racism. And as disgusting as that was, I was also considering my own biases. Despite my good intentions, there's always room for growth. This experience encouraged me to challenge my own perspectives on both art and life. So I decided that when I would start grad school, just 2 months later, I would explore what I judged, what I criticized or dismissed, and I would try to find some sort of value in it. And one of those things is gloop glaze. So you might be wondering, what is gloop? Some people refer to it as extreme glazing, although I don't think it needs to be used in that way. But it's basically this weird in-between between like clay and glaze. And what's really cool is that you can mix it very wet or you can mix it more like clay. And honestly, I never liked gloop up to this point in my life. I short-sightedly saw it as some internet trend rather than this frontier of material exploration. And ever since high school, I've always been drawn to the possibilities of ceramic materials. And I just love how there's so many ways to work with this one material and its potential with color. And I've experienced numerous ways with glue, from applying it into globs like this here, or from taking broken bits from failed pieces and sticking them into wet pots and refiring them, or suspending cups using this glaze, or perforating cups, rendering them useless. The possibilities felt endless. This was the first perforated vessel that I have made. It has about 950 perforations with the same number of glaze sticks. And I'm shown this piece because I had a studio visit with the ceramic designer Jolie No a couple of years ago when I was in grad school. And we're talking about this piece and this specific one. And she brought up this saying, painting straight from the tube. Basically, she was kindly implying that there's no nuance to the color. It kind of just looks like the mason stains I use, like Victoria green, Praseodymium yellow, and dark red. And this comment stuck with me all the way into my next adventure. But before I talk about that next adventure, I wanted to share a little bit about what I was working on in the background of exploring glue. So I took a class my first semester of grad school called Making History. That was taught by the potter Margaret Bowles, who was also my professor. And in this class, we had to recreate historical ceramic pieces of our choosing. I picked this plate from Japan made in the 1650s, and the style was called Kutani porcelain. I became increasingly infatuated with Kutani porcelain, which is a process of firing porcelain pottery to vitrification at very high temperatures, and then it is followed by applying low temperature lead base overglazes onto the fired porcelain and refiring it to lower temperatures around like this temp or even lower. This is an example of a Kutani glaze pouring vessel from the 1600s. And as much as I love the historical versions of Kutani, I was enamored by the work of Tokuda Yasukichi IV, whose work just stopped me in my tracks. The Yasukichi family is generations of Kutani potters, with the third generation pushing Kutani to these new heights. It actually led him to become a living national treasure in Japan, even. And the work reminded me of these Google images of volcanic rivers in Iceland that I used to look at when I was a kid. I remember looking at these while sitting on my air mattress that was partially deflating. And I would just sit there wishing that I could go and experience this. Thankfully, if I could figure this material out, then I could recreate the essence of these glazes for myself. So I began doing meticulous research trying to decipher esoteric articles on X-ray diffraction, chemical analyses on these historical Kutani shards. And if you don't know what I just said, that is okay because neither do I. But this cup was my very first attempt, and to me, it turned out terrible. However, I was thrilled regardless. I spent the next 2 years refining my recipe and my process. I began wet mixing metallic oxides at various ratios to achieve a wide variety of colors by just using about 8. And I began applying them on these commercial porcelain tiles that I would map out with squares using a Sharpie. These colors are both methodically and randomly placed. And this is what they look like on the left before they're fired. And then the center image is how I load them in the kiln. They're at a very slight tilt with the glaze catcher underneath. And the one on the right is the surface post-firing. And it results in this collaboration with me, material, and heat work. I dictate the placement of colors in a gridded system, and material and gravity break those barriers, flowing and blending into one another. These glazed tiles demonstrate my favorite qualities of ceramics too. That includes flow, color, translucency, unpredictability, and visual depth, which is highlighted in the crazing that happens on the surface of these tiles. Here's another example. Great. So it's April 2023. I just had my MFA thesis exhibition, and it was great seeing all of the explorations and curiosities that I explored in grad school presented in one space. But the best part about this experience was all of those who came out to support me. My parents, my high school ceramics teacher, my friend John Domenico, Brad Clem, Andrew Castaneda. It was really wonderful to have them there. So, it's June 2023. I just finished grad school and I made a trip out to Helena, Montana to spend 3 months as a summer resident at the Archie Bray Foundation. Well, I wish I could say that my car didn't fail me this time, but here it is. And I eventually made it to the place that I've always dreamt of being at. But the best thing about the Bray was the people who make it and their unique and insightful perspectives. Being around such amazing creators from diverse and creative backgrounds was inspiring and it encouraged me to push my work with each piece that I make. But while I was there, I was constantly thinking about that comment that Jolie No made just a few months prior, straight painting straight from the tube. So toward the end of my residency, I took 18 Mason stains and I mixed them into a 1-to-1 ratio. And this resulted in these test tiles with various shades of and hues of numerous colors. I have two test tiles for each color blend. One is at its most saturated and the other is the same with less stain, resulting in more pastel or lighter versions. And to save space in containers, what I do is I make a large batch of just the base glaze, so without any colorant, and then I grab how much I need for a specific piece, and I make colors out of those chunks. So it requires a lot of math and planning. However, it's worth it to me because it allows me to make numerous color schemes using more complex and nuanced colors. I now felt that I could take small details that I noticed in my life, like a walk in Pennsylvania during autumn, and reference them with, or reference these moments with color. This was the final piece that I pulled from the kiln before my time at the Bray ended. So after the Bray, I spent 2 additional years in Montana. I drove 4 hours south to a small mountain town called Red Lodge to start my residency at the Red Lodge Clay Center. And when I got here, I tried doing it all. I would go from trying to make these lamps and working with wiring. I was really scared of electrical work, but I tried to force myself to do it anyway. I would also try to make utilitarian pottery so I could sell these and make just a little bit of income on the side. And I would also try to expand on my tile works, and that included scaling up. That also included assembling multiple tiles and framing them as one unit, or assembling the tiles to make mirrors. And I would also coil build larger vessels and perforating thousands of holes, which means thousands of glaze sticks. And doing this all at the same time, I'm just feeling really scatterbrained. I'm feeling like none of my explorations are developing how I want them to. Trump just got reelected, and I am just doing too much. So at the end of 2024, I decided to focus just on the vessels. They are the things that I felt most excited about in the studio, and there were many directions that I could see them taking. So, at the beginning of this year, I first explored various perforation sizes. So not only do fewer glaze bits allow each individual one to stand out, but it provided more surface area for me to mix and blend colors in one glaze log. And each glaze component asserts itself in its own way. Some will quietly soften or turn inward, yet many refuse containment altogether. They will leap from their molds, almost spilling over the boundaries that I set. And to me, they're kind of like manifestations of the complexities of each of our human experiences and how we respond to them. And I must say, the one thing that I love about clay is that it exposes any corners that are cut. So when I was making this piece, I was rushing the rolling process and I left a bunch of air pockets in the glaze. and those air pockets were revealed when I fired it. I really do love the split one in the detail image. And here is another example of a double pouring vessel. This one is a little visually intense for my general liking, even though I do enjoy it a bit. But the thing that I really enjoy about this piece is that I basically did a gradient or an ascending perforation sizes. So at the top is the smallest perforations, and then as you work down, they get larger. And what I really like about this piece is that it really shows you what material does as you increase the mass of it too. This one I think is pretty cool, and I'll tell you why. Because back in May, I was lucky enough to have this piece end up on the cover of Ceramics Monthly. I was selected as one of the emerging artists that they do in the month of May, and it was a really great surprise to see this on the cover. And even cooler, my friend Brad Clem, like 8 years ago or so, also got on the cover. And what's even cooler is that we both have these double vessels on the cover, which I thought was just really interesting. Here is where some subtle developments begin. So I'm trying to think of ways to use the gloop without having to do perforations. So I make these patties of glaze that I then suspend on these little rods that are sticking out of the surface of the vessel. And then I would fire it to cone 06, and then they would just kind of like pull apart and kind of stretch and attach and pull from one another. And I really enjoyed this piece because it kind of comes full circle back to my initial interests in soda firing back in high school and undergrad. So I have a really good friend. His name is Casey Beck. He's an amazing potter, and his surfaces with soda firing are just amazing. He did a 2-week residency at Red Lodge while I was there, and he was kind enough to put this piece in the kiln. So we're about 5 months ago. So this is probably May or something. And at this point, I'm thinking of other ways of working with this glute material. Can a ceramic piece be just glazed by any chance? How can I use it in how can I use it past making just glazed logs? And how would that look? And how would I do that? So these are questions that I'm asking myself. So to make these, it's similar to how I make the glaze colors for my perforated vessels. So I start off by weighing out the base glaze for each color, and I add the appropriate amount of various stains. And then I mix them, and then I divide up the colors in ascending and descending quantities, and I pair them together. And that results in this gradient of color that I layer to then create a pattern. And then after some splicing and assembling, I then put them together to form a slab of glaze. And then what I do is I throw these domed clay molds and I add a bit of kiln wash to the mold and fire the slab on top of it. And sometimes they fail, oftentimes more than not. But when they do work out, they result in this. Here's another example. So they're attached to the mold, and then the kiln wash allows them to pop off so they don't stick. And then what I do is I sandblast the surface, kind of removing any extra kiln wash, and then also removing any like sheen or gloss on the surface. Here's another example. Here. Great. So now we are getting close to the end. So now I'm here at the wonderful American Museum of Ceramic Art in Pomona, California, and I have been here for 2 months. And like I said before, I am loving every minute of it. And it's really sort of interesting to see how my practice has come full circle from high school. Because back then I was interested in assembling wheel-thrown forms, and here I am doing a very similar thing. And there is already so much to share about my time here at AMOCA. However, I have another artist talk toward the end of my residency, and during that, I want to focus on my experiences and explorations here at AMOCA. You might be wondering, so what are you going to explore while you're here? Um, as you can see, I've taken a lot of different directions throughout my career over these last 13 years. I have intentions on continuing these vessels, but who knows? I might get sidetracked and do something else. However, I just wanted to take the time and just say thank you for being here. It really means a lot to me. So thanks.
Meanwhile, thank you so much, Max, for that talk. I really do enjoy you talking about the balance between just your artistic practice and your mental health and how you came around to like going through every one of those. Really a world, really what 2020 was.
Yeah, right. I appreciate you saying that.
No problem.
Yeah, I think a lot of us, especially makers, I think we struggle to find the balance between like work and life. When people ask me like, "What are your hobbies?" I'm like, "Oh no, I don't know if I have any because I'm always in the studio." And then I just go home after. So yeah, just trying to divide time to have time for your mental health and then for your work and for yourself too is what I've been working on.
No, and I think that's one of the biggest struggles for artists to not fall into that trope of just like I'm an artist and I live and breathe art and
Mhm.
I do not take care of myself. So bravo. And now we'll go on to questions. We have one from Bianca saying, amazing job. Will you focus on form or gloop or both with your time here?
Oh, let me see. Where is that down there? Okay, there you go. Oh, that's a good question. I appreciate that. So I think Bianca's really wonderful. She's the other long-term resident here. To answer your question, what I feel right now is I think I will focus more on this gloop glaze. I'm really trying to think of other ways to work with this material. And then one thing I'm also thinking of doing is that I have all these different things that I like want to explore, but I'm starting to ask myself more and more is that how can I take elements of all of those different explorations and then bring them together to make one cohesive piece. So rather than like dividing them as like these individual practices, I would like to see some sort of element from each exploration in one vessel too. So that I feel like that's what I'll be focusing on with my time here.
Awesome. And the next question we have from David Lee. I might have missed it, but what are you looking forward to in the next and the most in the next year?
Well, David, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate your time. Um, One thing that I am looking forward to is the possibility of staying in California potentially. I have been so transient for the past 6 years. I don't really spend more than a couple of years in one place. However, being here with this short amount of time, I've loved the people that I've met, including you, David. I enjoyed our conversations and I love the energy that is happening around here. And it would be really great to find an opportunity that would allow me to stay in California. And I don't quite know what that looks like quite yet. That could translate into another California-based residency or potentially a job because I've been making four figures for the last 13 years, so I'm a little tired of that. But yeah, I would say those are some of the things that I'm really looking forward to. And then just in general, I'm excited to see where the work takes me or where I take the work because, like I said, I'm not 100% sure.
Awesome. And then we have another question. They keep just coming in. Gabby is asking, hi, Max, you're awesome. What themes and messages do you find yourself returning to in your work?
Hi, Gabby. Oh, I'm so glad that you had a chance to be a part of this. Thank you for making the time. Um, Man, this is what my grad school teachers would ask me during my defense. It's a good question. A lot of the themes that I think about I would say one of my main subjects is just ceramic materiality and curiosities within it. Let's see real quick. This is something that I think about a lot too. So one of my issues is we all have an artist statement that we write to discuss our work. However, my ideas and my priorities are always shifting. But what I like to think of is that these pieces that I make are an extension of myself. So I spend a lot of time applying moments that I notice, details that I notice in my life through the vessel forms. So, for example, I had a piece with like autumn colors, and that was a direct reference to my time in Pennsylvania and just seeing fall for the first time. I also like to think of my practice as more of a collaboration rather than like an individual practice. And what I mean by that is that I'm always in collaboration with myself and the material because what can I do? I can decide pattern, I can dictate form, I can decide color and the placement of these materials. However, when I put them in the kiln, the the glaze, the materials, they're going to do their own things that are basically out of my control. Um, so I would say that would be one of the main things that I am thinking of in the studio. There's a lot of other little factors and narratives that come into play. However, the thing that I'm thinking at the forefront is this collaboration between me and the material. Well, so that was a little long-winded. That's something I still think about because it's always evolving. And sometimes I'm not sure what those themes are. Sometimes they come out, and other times I just discover them as I go.
Lovely. And then our next question is from Nathan. And he asks, hearing about your historical approach with clay and glaze during your time at university, do you plan to work with AMOCA's historical collection or collections in the area?
Ooh, that's a good question. I would love that actually. I do reference a lot of historical objects. I'm not ever referencing like just one piece or one period in history. A lot of my work takes a lot of like subtle elements from various cultures and time periods. But yes, I would absolutely love to go into the historical collection that AMOCA has. And working alongside with Bianca McPherson, it's really amazing to watch her time to go to these universities and go into their archives and to watch how rich it makes her work and how much intention and education and history that is in each individual piece, I think is really powerful. And I would like to have more of that in my work. So the answer is yes, I would love to spend more time with the historical collection here at AMOCA.
Perfect. And then we have another question from Allison,
Hi, Allison.
who's saying, hi, Max. Thank you for your informative and candid artist talk. So great to see your pathway and not shy away from the tough stuff. But do you consider the draped glaze slabs, plates similar to Narikomi process with colored Portland?
Yes. Hi, Allison. Again, thank you for being here too. We should hang out soon. To answer your question, yeah, I do look at, I don't know why, actually, I'm glad you brought that up. I don't know why I didn't mention it, but there's this technique in ceramics called Nirakomi, and it's basically taking colored porcelain and then assembling them in a way to create patterns. And then when you like slice through, you can see those patterns. And it's very referential to what I'm doing with the slabs of glaze and partly even the like logs of glaze when I mix the colors and with like the extra surface area. Um, I do really enjoy the process of cutting and assembling the pieces to create the patterns. I think the difference between Nirakomi and what I'm doing is that I feel like they're really intentional about the patterns that they create, whereas mine are a little more loose. And mostly it's just because that once I fire that slab of glaze, that glaze is going to like stretch and pull And no matter how perfect I try to get the pattern, it's going to warp basically. But yes, it is very referential to the Narikomi process. And basically, it's the exact same process, like the technical process, except I'm using glaze instead of porcelain too. But the glaze is just as finicky as porcelain, so it's kind of the same thing.
Perfect. And then we'll take our last question from David Lee, who has a raised hand. If you want to unmute yourself and ask that question, David.
Yeah, I think it's easier to talk through. Not quite related to art. I'm not from an art background, so the question might be a little bit of a different vibe. But as an artist, you want to engage with our audience, and also by engaging, you can bring into certain financial resources to support you in the long term, such as staying in California, such as building a career in commercialization. Uh, as an artist, have you thought about what are some of those vehicles, and such as social media or having pop-up events, hosting different patrons? Just curious to see where your head is at.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that question, David. Yeah, I feel like there's a lot of different directions that a career in art, particularly ceramics, could take me. I initially went to grad school because I had the intention of teaching at a university level. So that was one direction I was thinking of doing is like becoming a professor. However, when I was in grad school, I had to deal with I didn't deal with the administrative BS that the professors did in the same way, but I did witness and experience some of it and that really put me off. I also felt like it's not my program in particular, but some programs like just kind of teach their students how to be teachers instead of like how to be artists in the field. And now that like I'm out of school, there's so much that I'm encountering in the real world of art that I was never really warned about when I was in school. But for me, my main goal is to be a practicing studio artist, to like have my own studio, and then to work out of that and then to sell that work through galleries and exhibit the work. The hardest thing for me has been networking because I'm a bit avoidant. I'm a little introverted. And then I also get really anxious about like digital communication. So I end up like kind of doing that whole isolation thing again. And then I have to come back, do a whole apology tour for the like 10 people that interacted with me and I didn't reach out to for like a week. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is because networking seems to be a really plays a major role in like getting opportunities. And I feel like these experiences, I'm like shooting myself in the foot by doing that. So I'm trying to be better at that too. I feel like I might have lost sight of your question a little bit, but I
No,
oh sorry.
no, I said no. That's keep talking. It's fine.
Great, great. Sounds good. And then you also mentioned the word commercialization, and that's actually why I kind of stepped away from the tiles for a little bit because I really love the surface. I love the quality of the glaze. However, I can imagine seeing these in a commercial setting. Maybe not with the patterns that might be a little too intense to like cover an entire wall with, but to use these materials and these surfaces to kind of do like a commercial installation of these tiles. And I think of the work of California-based artist slash designer Ben Medansky too. I really love what he's doing with tile works as well. So in terms of commercialization, that's the direction that I see the tiles taking at some point in the future.
Hmm.
However, I'm just trying not to stretch myself thin and just like focus on one thing at the time too.
Yeah. Yeah, we can work on something together. Bring some people in.
Yeah, that would be great. Yeah, and yeah, we should talk soon. And then I would love to like meet up and chat with you more.
Sounds good.
Cool.
Thanks for the session. It's awesome.
Absolutely. Thanks for being here.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Max. And I want to thank you all for joining us and for your all excellent questions. For more of Maxwell Henderson's content, visit him on Instagram at mh_pottery. We'll drop that link in the chat box. And if you're in the neighborhood of Pomona or in Los Angeles, come visit the museum and ceramic studio here. And to learn a little bit more, just visit us at amoca.org. And if you've missed half this presentation or you popped in a little late, don't worry. This presentation will be available on AMOCA's website in the coming weeks. And just a heads up, our artists in residence will be having their own exhibition, winter 2026. So keep an eye out for that. And thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.